Yes, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending where you are. I'm really pleased to welcome you to our second session of the Natural Capital Lunch and Learn webinar series organized by the Green Finance Institute and by Pollination. Today, this session is actually in the middle of the two organized by GFI and Pollination. The session is organized by the Natural Capital Investment Alliance. And it will be today. We will explain a little bit more later on what the Alliance does and how this actually fits in the wider program. For those that were yesterday, they saw an excellent presentation on focusing on nature-related risks, dependencies, and impacts. It was a really good discussion. And it was really driven by the advent of the task force on nature-related financial disclosure, which so the panel kind of concluded will put the spotlight much more on nature-related risks. Today we want to shift the focus a little bit. What we realized under the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate Financial Related Disclosure, is really that the moment companies start to look at the climate-related risks, they understand what they can and cannot do any longer, but also they're immediately trying to find the opportunity in the risk. I think it's like with everything in life. Everywhere there's an opportunity, everywhere there's a risk, there's also an opportunity. And that's really what we want to discuss today, how different companies, different asset management firms are looking at natural capital, why they're interested in this, what concrete investments idea they are offering, and also what the natural, I said it already, what the Natural Capital Investment Alliance is and how it can actually contribute to this discussion. So I'm really pleased to have an excellent panel. We have Alina Dotz, the lead portfolio manager of Lombard Odier. We have Ewan Murray, the head of investment at International Federated Hermes, and we have Gauthier Curu from the Land Degradation and Neutrality Fund, and Mirora. So I suggest we're jumping actually right into the discussion, and I'd like to hand over the microphone to Alina, and perhaps Alina, you could introduce yourself. We've done this actually, by the way, yesterday as well. Rather than me giving lengthy biographies about our speakers, it's really a much more interactive way that the speakers going ahead, introducing themselves, their company. But then also, Alina, what we're really interested in is we know Lombard Odier is very active on natural capital products, and perhaps you could introduce a little bit how you and your clients assess the opportunity around natural capital.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Martin, for having me. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody on the panel and listening to the panel today. So as a matter of introduction, as Martin has mentioned, my name is Alina Dotz. I work for Lombard Odier Investment Managers, so the investment management arm of our bank. And I'm currently a lead portfolio manager on our natural capital strategy. The fund is part of what we would call liquid asset space. So we invest in publicly listed securities of companies. And there are really two key objectives that we're pursuing with this fund. We are investing in protection and preservation of nature, as well as harnessing the nature and natural resources in a sustainable manner. We do it by really targeting two key investment areas, and those are solutions within the circular bioeconomy and the lean forms of industry. Now, I think our fund is quite specific in several ways. And I guess the first way is, or the first specificity of the fund is that we actually invest in solution providers or the enablers as opposed to specific projects. The reason behind that is, of course, first of all, we are investing in public equity. So that implies investing in companies. But equally, we actually think that the companies that develop solutions that enable or unlock the opportunities within the natural capital and really help to transition the entire economy towards one that manages the natural resources in a sustainable manner and protects and harnesses natural capital are key in order to accelerate and really empower the transition. The second differentiation is that we are very much active investors. And by that, I mean to say that we have a strong engagement policy within our fund. So we're not just allocating the capital, but we're very proactively communicating with our investees to encourage them to shift their strategy towards really developing and growing the business areas that are relevant to natural capital. Now, the foundation of our fund is actually built on the framework that we have developed internally within Lombard Odier, and that framework serves as the really a skeleton of our sustainability approach. The framework is called CLICK, and it's an acronym that stands for 4 key characteristics of what we believe is a sustainable and just economic model. The 4 letters stand for circular, inclusive, clean, and lean. Apologies. We have started developing strategies around the acronym last year. The first strategy that we have launched was the Climate Transition Fund that we have launched at the beginning of 2020, addressing the clean part, so really focusing on climate transition specifically. And then the second strategy that we have launched back in November 2020 was the Natural Capital Fund. And within the fund, we focus on circularity and lean, of course. I have personally experience in managing strategies for 8 years within the water space, so very much attuned to the understanding of the importance of natural resources and the way of how to invest towards the improvement of the management of these through public markets. And I have been very pleased to be brought on to the team to actually lead and manage our portfolio in natural capital. The fund is very thematically focused, but we also develop internally different tools that enable us to really try to identify the performance of the companies relative to key objectives of the fund. And I will probably stop here and pass back to Martin.
Thank you very much, Alina. That was a really helpful introduction to what you are doing, and it's very relevant. Owen, maybe I can pass over to you, same to you. Could you just introduce yourself, explain a little bit more about Federated Hermes, and then also what's your interest in natural capital? How did you and your company actually get interested in this?
Many thanks, Martin, and also for the invitation to be part of this excellent Lunch and Learn series, which seems like a much needed and very timely exercise. I noticed in a very recent Responsible Investor and Credit Suisse survey that about a quarter of respondents were unsure as to how to take the first steps when investing for biodiversity, and that 32% felt that they lacked the knowledge to do so. This does feel indeed really timely. By way of intro, I'm the Chief Investment Officer of the international business of Federated Hermes, a mouthful, a business that looks after institutional and wholesale assets across both public and private markets. Specifically in the area of biodiversity, we're probably best known for our work in stewardship, where we engage actively with companies to improve their footprint, both from a risk mitigation standpoint and to seek return opportunities. And then also our real estate business, where the concept of placemaking and the creation of green urban space has been key to developments at King's Cross in London, Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, and with ongoing developments in Bristol and Glasgow. We've enjoyed observer status of the TNFD and have recently just applied for membership, so that's in progress. And on a personal note, I'm extremely excited to have been accepted to St Andrews University for a postgrad course on sustainable aquaculture. So I'll be catching up with Alina starting in the autumn, and hopefully that will boost my knowledge and understanding of that area. So as I mentioned, our interest really historically has centered around our engagement work and in our real estate business. That stewardship for equity and bondholders has focused on topics that are really quite closely linked to biodiversity for many years: deforestation, climate change, watershed sustainability. But we have more recently complemented this with a direct biodiversity and ecosystem service lens. We recently published a white paper, Our Commitment to Nature, which outlines the priority sectors for engagement and our expectations across 5 categories of activity. So around governance, measurement, targets, strategy, and disclosure. And we intend to complement that existing stewardship work in the not too distant future with more direct investments in nature-based services across all asset classes. And I hope that I'll have an opportunity to tell you more about that as the year progresses. We've also been following topics such as debt for nature swaps and sustainability-linked nature green or blue bonds, and are very firm advocates for both concepts, plus having some ideas on how they and their usage could be improved. Martin, back to you.
Thank you very much, Owen. Then let's get Gauthier into the discussion. Gauthier, same to you. Please introduce yourself and move over. And then let's also jump maybe right into a bit more kind of the discussion. So, well, why don't you do the introduction, then I pose the first question for you. It's probably the easier way.
Okay, thank you, Martin, and hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So my name is Guillaume Kerry. I'm Director of Land Degradation Neutrality Strategy at Mirova, and also co-head of the Natural Capital platform. And I've been active in the field of sustainable finance for many years, including in carbon finance, renewable energy finance. And these days, there is definitely an interesting momentum around natural capital. And this series of webinar is also a good example, demonstrating that there are many things happening. And actually, Mirova is a fund management company, part of Natixis, and itself fully dedicated to sustainable development, so aligning our portfolios with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and hopefully later this year, the Kunming Agreement on biodiversity. And we try to innovate, develop strategies to address multiple challenges that humanity and the world are facing. And in the field of biodiversity, natural capital, we've been active for more than 7 years with initial strategies in the field of agroforestry and forest carbon. Also, the land degradation neutrality strategy was developed 5 years ago with the United Nations as well. And these are more real assets, direct investment into agroforestry and forest protection or ocean protection projects. But actually, we have also developed other strategies and tools to not only address real assets opportunities, but also in the listed equities world, listed bonds and so on, where we have developed also instruments and methodologies to measure biodiversity impacts and dependencies for portfolios. And finally, we're also together with this active engagements, willing also to contribute to various marketplace initiatives, putting together public and private actors. We referred to the TNFD earlier today, and the webinar yesterday was mostly about it. This is the type of thing we're also supporting together with the Alliance, the Natural Capital Investment Alliance, which is more, as you said, Martin, on the opportunity side. So yeah, new investment frontier, very interesting topic, and we are fully committed to develop this natural capital sector.
Perfect. And I think you already mentioned now a few different ways of engaging international capital. Alina did the same, and so did Owen. So maybe we should start on a higher level. Many investors that come to us, to climate asset managers, saying, okay, I heard about natural capital, heard about the biodiversity loss, that's great, but how do you build an investment strategy around it? And firstly, what is it actually? Is this an asset class, or where does this fit in my portfolio? So how do you see this at Mirova? Is this an own asset class?
Well, I don't think so. And actually, we had interesting debate within the Alliance member, and I'm sure we will continue to have them throughout the lifetime of the Alliance. Rather than a specific asset class, we rather see natural capital as an investment theme that is really that can be then implemented through multiple traditional asset class, ranging from fixed income bonds, listed equities, real assets, commodities. What is important in the end is that it really refers to investment that really supports ecological business models that are seeking really to translate risk into opportunities and provide a stable financial return, but also measurable environmental and certainly social impact as well. And really the key is the integrity, the contribution to the preservation, restoration of natural capital, but we need to be open to these different asset classes, because actually there are needs throughout the entire economy of different sources of funding, and there are also opportunities in these different types of investments with innovative businesses, either small private equity investments or big companies transforming their business model in the listed market. Also very good projects, agroforestry systems, sustainable forestry, sustainable fisheries that are also providing interesting opportunities. So yeah, we need to be very open in the definition of the asset class, of the investment theme, in order to really capture the full opportunities out there.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I can then bring in Owen one more time. And Owen, you already talked a bit about that. At the moment, you're focusing mostly on the this disclosure side at the moment. So I think you recently announced that you actually ask companies to disclose their impacts on biodiversity and set a target for a net positive impact. I think that would be really interesting to drill into this a bit more. And if you could tell us a bit more, what was the background, what's the rationale, and then more importantly, where are you coming from this? Is this really for you a risk? Is this kind of the focus on the risk? Do you want to understand the risk, or do you also see this as a first step into moving into the opportunities around natural capital?
Yeah, that's right, Martin. We have indeed recently announced that as best practice, we expect companies to commit to have a net positive impact on biodiversity, including throughout their supply chain, by 2030 at the very latest. Equally, on the flip side, as a minimum requirement, we expect companies should have no negative impact on biodiversity, again, including supply chains. So the sectors that we're targeting include consumer goods and retail, utilities, mining and materials, oil and gas, agrochemicals, real estate and construction, and of course, financial services, because it's important to think where the financing of economic activity occurs. Maybe if I give you an example, that will help hopefully unpack our approach. So if you take regenerative agriculture, we know that approximately half of the world's habitable land is now used for agriculture, with 77% of that roughly used for animal grazing and growing crops for animal feed. So obviously that's less available space for forests and grasslands and other natural ecosystems that provide the habitats for wild species. So we must transition to some form of more sustainable agriculture and do away with high chemical inputs. We'll try and reduce monocropping, and then also improve the soil's natural ability to sequester carbon. So what we're saying to companies is, with your agricultural supply chains, they should actively be supporting and encouraging farmers in that transition. That's both from an environmental and from a social perspective. They should be setting targets and sourcing ingredients and materials from regenerative agriculture wherever that's possible. And we also know that there is scope for some innovation and disruption in this sector. So you've got precision agriculture, vertical farming looks quite interesting. And then lab green proteins are already sort of making their mark. And I think all of those too will play a critical role alongside regenerative agriculture in the future. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense for some of the risks that we're trying to mitigate, and also some of the opportunities for development that we see.
Perfect. Thank you. And that kind of is a nice segue to Alina, who already talked a little bit about the strategy that they developed. Maybe Alina, you could step, because you jumped right into the details of your product. Maybe you can explain to our audience one more time what your thinking was at Lombard Odier, why you actually went into natural capital. I mean, you seem to be, when one opens your website, it's immediately there. So it seems to be not only sustainability, but also natural capital. It seems to be a big focus. So what's the rationale for for Lombard Odier to with the focus, and then also where does the product that you're offering sitting in the asset class, and why did you end up with the strategy you ended up? I think that would be really interesting for the audience.
Absolutely. So coming back to I guess the foundation or the initial idea behind the strategy. So as I mentioned, we have developed this framework for a transition of the current economy and the social, I guess, process or framework from how it exists today and how it has been evolving over the past centuries into something that will be more aligned with the planetary's own abilities and the conditions that could enhance the sustainability of our economic and social systems. And that transition would be encompassed by our framework that we described as a transition from a wild economy into the click economy. And within that click economy, we have identified, again, the four key transformations that need to really take place in the economic sphere or in our humanity. And that's the transition towards greater circularity, leanness, inclusiveness from a social perspective, and then also clean operations. And in order to enable this transition, we believe at Lombard Odier that we need to start shifting, first of all, the capital towards investing in solutions, be it solutions that enable the transition, such as the technology providers, or solutions specifically addressing the challenges by, for example, even direct investing, which is something that we're considering to explore as well. So that's the first transition that needs to happen. And then obviously the second transition is just the mindset of investors. So yes, we have created certain specific strategies that target either climate, such as our Climate Transition Fund on Natural Capital, but equally we are aiming to introduce this mindset of investing for click purposes or click objectives across all of our funds, and really making sure that the entire investment society and we as representatives of the investment society are allocating the capital in the most efficient way, not only from the economical perspective, but also from a sustainable perspective. And natural capital is a big topic. So we believe that we are far behind where we need to be. That we have potentially missed the tipping point with the climate change and the carbon emissions. Because we haven't mobilized the capital soon enough, and the regulators were also perhaps a little bit slower than they could have been in adjusting and introducing regulations. Thankfully, we have learned from that lesson, and today we actually see that a number of key forces are coming together to support the preservation of natural capital, be it from the regulatory perspective, so really thinking about all the different incentives that we see, including the TNFD being put together in time to address these issues, but also gatherings around the COP that are really focused on biodiversity and many other initiatives. But equally, what we see today is that actually the consumer is much stronger in voicing their preferences for environmentally friendly and sustainable products and production processes, consumption processes. The technology is also there, so we can come up with economic decisions or economic solutions that are not only creating wealth for the environment, but they are also economically and financially attractive, which obviously hugely supports the penetration. And then, of course, the investor society is much more knowledgeable on the environmental topics, and yet there is still such a large opportunity or such a large need for capital. So identifying all these four key drivers and acknowledging the fact that they're all very active and very important and current as it stands today, we have identified a niche opportunity or a need to create a strategy that will really help to address all these topics and will help to mobilize the capital and gather the capital around the solutions for the natural capital.
Very interesting. And is this driven from you at Lombard Odier, or do you also have clients that come to you and saying, look, I want to go beyond ESG investing. I would like to have my investments also linked to natural capital. Is this something that you're already seeing on within your clients?
Absolutely. And I think that the clients are increasingly more keen and looking for solutions that are not only addressing sustainability from ESG perspective, so not only looking at the practices of the companies, for example, that they would invest in, but very much looking for impact-like investment opportunities. And of course, impact investing is very specific, and there is a lot of processes that need to be put in place in terms of the monitoring and measurement and also allocation of the positive impact to the actual investors. It's much more difficult to do it when you're investing in public equity. However, we still believe that with the correct framework and the thematic approach and some of the tools that we have created internally, it is still possible to invest in public equity with the strong connection to the positive outcomes relative to environmental and social objectives.
Oh, interesting. And we are asked a lot, okay, this is really interesting. We also would like to have more impact on our investments, but the obvious question always comes is, does it come at the expense of our return? Are you getting this question a lot? Or?
We're getting this question almost at every client meeting, and the answer is always no. It is actually a financial opportunity because the need for the transition is there. As I mentioned, they're really the key driving forces are accelerating this investment. And actually, if I come back to some of the comments by Ian or by Gauthier, there is a need to address it at all different levels. And we have already seen this initiatives to push the companies towards, for example, the neutrality when it comes to biodiversity or even net positive contributions to biodiversity. That all creates an opportunity for developing the solutions that really enable that transition, that really enable to preserve the biodiversity, to preserve and support the ecosystems. And investing in companies that recognize that opportunity and fully integrate that opportunity within their business strategies is a huge component that is supportive of the financial returns. So no, on the contrary, we actually expect that there is going to be an excess financial return in addition to the market returns that we can generate by purely focusing really on the natural capital solutions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Erin and Gauthier, it would be great if you could also now keep your cameras on, and same as Alina, because I think we're getting now already the first questions, and then we can engage in much more in an open discussion here. Also for the audience, so you have an ability via the Q&A to ask questions. I already see the first questions here, but I would just to give Gauthier one more time a little bit a chance to also explain a little bit more now what type of, like, if someone comes now to me, Vova, and says, I want to invest in natural capital in a way, how would you address that? What are the offerings that you're actually having, and in what area of the kind of asset classes that you describe?
Yeah, so yeah, what we've been developing so far has been mostly in the field of real assets. So in unlisted investments that are related to actually mostly companies, projects on the ground. So far, mostly in developing countries, but also more and more in developed countries. And actually through also blended finance vehicles, we have been developing, I would say, 3 approaches within this natural capital real assets theme that can address different needs or opportunities for investors. The first one is I would say long-term finance for sustainable land use, for productive system to produce food and fiber. So in the field of agriculture, forestry, it's almost a infrastructure finance. So instead of financing what is needed to build an infrastructure or to plant a windmill and getting repaid by the sale of electricity, we finance what is needed to plant trees, and we are getting repaid by the sale of coffee, cocoa, wood over the long run. And this is close to infrastructure investment in the end, able to provide a long-term yield and also with a balanced risk-return profile. And we see growing opportunities in that space, especially in the forestry sector. Second approach would be more private equity-like investment into companies that provide technology services for these for circular economy, for recycling technology, for sustainable value chains. And this is especially the case in the blue economy, where we see many innovative companies that are suitable for private equity-like investments. And finally, and this is linked also with one of the questions in the Q&A, carbon finance, or payment for ecosystem services. This is also an area where we can develop specific financing instruments with a purchase agreement of carbon credits that are prepaid and that can finance projects. And there is a new boom in this carbon finance space, and definitely an opportunity as well. So yeah, 3 different types of approaches, but then can be combined also at different project levels. So a lot of innovative approaches also, and standardization to develop in these activities.
Yeah, that's actually the reference to carbon credits is actually refers to one of the first questions we received here from the audience, and so we have one question: how is the carbon component integrated into your investment strategies? Is carbon credits part of the business model of your investment in your funds? I think, Gucci, for the one fund we just understood yes, but in general, how do you look at it? Are you also looking at more holistically? Are you reporting on the carbon? How does it actually work? Is it a value driver for some of the other strategies? Or?
Absolutely, yes. I think nature-based solutions, the preservation of natural capital, the restoration of degraded land is key to meet the Paris Agreement, and all these carbon sinks have a great value. To meet this global objective, that is then turned into potential additional revenue, indeed, with carbon credits, with different schemes, or they can be taxes, tax breaks that are favorable to this project. I think that public policies and national strategies are more and more putting this signal in the market. And yes, in our strategies, investing in agroforestry projects, in sustainable forestry projects, carbon credits are integrated as either as the main revenue stream for a really carbon finance approach, or as an additional revenue stream for instance, agriculture or forestry approach, but that will enhance the risk return profile of the project and make it even more attractive. So it can be really a game changer to unlock further investments.
Thank you, Gucci. Maybe I can ask the same question to Alina and Eun, and maybe not any. I suspect carbon credits, maybe not, but carbon, I'm sure, plays also a role in your assessment. And then we got another question: how do we capture the social aspects of biodiversity? So there's in particular interest in funding solutions that work with the local community, not imposing outside savior solutions. Is that part of your approach?
So let me start then. Yes, indeed, carbon is a very important part of our investment process and the assessment of the performance of the companies relative to the Paris Agreement. So first of all, it comes at the level of assessing the practices of the companies. As I mentioned before, we have developed a number of internal tools, and one of the tools that we're very proud of is our temperature assessment tool. It looks at the performance of the companies relative to their carbon footprint, but also the trajectory of adjusting that footprint in relation to achieving the Paris Agreement targets of reducing the temperature to 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees Celsius objectives. And when we're utilizing that tool, we're able to assess each of the company's performance using the information about the existing emissions, about their targets, whether those targets are actually certified with the science-based objectives, and also the trajectory of reduction of these emissions relative to the industries and relative to what needs to be done at the industry level. So we take into the account the carbon emissions from the practices perspective, and equally that framework allows to adjust for the business strategy. So for example, a company that would be producing let's say steel-based or out of the recycled products would obviously have a much lower carbon footprint than the company that does it by sourcing from the raw materials and iron ores. So it is a substantial part of the whole investment philosophy. And on top of that, also highlighting the areas that Gauthier has mentioned, of course, investing in companies that support, for example, regenerative farming, be it by developing the farming equipment or by developing the kind of the solutions of sourcing and in the approach to sourcing and procurement from sustainably managed farming is also another way how we indirectly support the carbon capture and the related projects. So it is also deeply ingrained in the strategy.
Perfect, thank you. And the Owen, any additional? We can also move. I mean, are you looking also at the social aspects of biodiversity? Is there something that that plays a role? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Just as with the social aspects of climate change, inevitably there's a just transition to consider and reflect on. So for every change that we make in the E of ESG, whether that's with climate or biodiversity ecosystem loss, there will be almost certainly some impact on human capital. And that's why I'm been particularly encouraged by some of the discussions at sort of supranational bank level, where you get IMF and others, World Bank, very willing, and the US, in fact, very willing to entertain debt for nature swaps and the like, where they are conscious that the burden probably falls on companies, countries, I should say, which are far more heavily indebted, where there's much greater poverty, much greater inequality. And so all of those things do get taken into account. Don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near enough, but at least we've made a good start. And then to add to Alina's comments on and Gauthier's comments on carbon, I think we're probably doing very similar things, all to some extent with our own independent carbon models. And like their firms, we too at Federated Hermes have made some commitments around our corporate path to Paris alignment and net zero. And then similarly for each individual asset class. And we've set out dates by which we intend to achieve all of those. So it's all there, set in stone, and now we just need to be cracking on with it.
Perfect. Now, next question here is really on the barriers to natural capital investing, and maybe we can see with you Owen. So what is required to make this a bit more mainstream?
Well, so I was thinking about this when I saw the question go up there, and I talked earlier about the survey, the very recent survey from Responsible Investor and Credit Suisse, and I think there are about over 300 respondents covering, say, 30 odd countries. About half of those were asset owners and half were asset managers, so pretty balanced and pretty global. And a number of the questions that they asked were around what was preventing natural capital investment from going mainstream. And one of the things I recall was that about 84% of the respondents were very concerned about biodiversity loss, with a further 10%, I think, being somewhat concerned. So I thought, well, that's great. That's absolutely amazing. But then there was a subsequent question, which from memory then said, are you concerned about the impact of biodiversity loss in financial markets? And those that were very concerned fell from 84 down to 40, whereas somewhat concerned went from 10 up to 46. So clearly there's a group of investors out there who somehow feel that the financial markets sort of operate in some sort of vacuum, completely immune from the real world, which I find extraordinary. So that tells me there is a big part of education that we can address. And I think other things that seem to be holding investors back included things like a lack of knowledge and a lack of global standard. So again, there are lots of initiatives out there, including TNFD that we've recently mentioned, and indeed the one that you guys have created. So let's hope that might help fill that gap. What I would add too, though, is from memory, there was something around the dearth of data, suggesting that investors, where they can go the extra mile, so like Gauthier, like Alina, there are real alpha opportunities out there because that data is so hard to come by, and it takes a lot of hard work to get it out there. So the last question that comes to mind in that survey was around what was needed to mainstream biodiversity. And 45% of respondents cited data. I think 33, it was around awareness raising and education, 10% policy and regulation, and 7% investable products. So there you go. That, I think, gives us the challenge ahead.
No, thank you very much. And this is the challenge and I'm speaking now, me, Rover, Lombard, and Climate Estimate identified as well. And that's why we formed the Natural Capital Investment Alliance. And perhaps, Alina, you can give us a bit more in a short introduction, what the background is, why we came to this. I think it actually speaks to this survey, right? So it really tries to address a few things from the survey.
Absolutely, with great pleasure. So Natural Capital Investment Alliance is part of the Sustainable Markets Initiative, launched and managed and promoted by His Royal Highness Prince of Wales. The alliance was specifically developed for the investment managers or the asset managers, and the key purpose or the key objective of the alliance is to mobilize $10 billion of US dollars in assets towards the solutions or strategies devoted to natural capital. But of course, it's not the sole purpose, and the idea is very much aligned with what Ian has been discussing just now, and that is educating the investment society, be it the asset managers or the actual asset owners and the capital owners, on what is possible and what are the opportunities within the natural capital investment space. So we have been the three of the key launching partners together with HSBC Pollination, Mirova, and Lombard Odier. And we're currently proactively and actively looking for members to join our efforts.
Perfect, thank you. Gucci, maybe I think we also have a bit something to announce. This was announced as part of His Royal Highness's Terra Carta back in January, and I think we've done quite a bit of work now, and I think we have some new material to show. So maybe you can explain a little bit where we stand and also with additional members for the Alliance, Gucci.
Yeah. After the announcement earlier this year, and with more work with the Sustainable Market Initiative, we are ready now to move to the next phase and onboard new members. Have a formal website. There is now a beautiful brochure also, so it's getting real, concrete, and really with these new steps, we are looking forward to welcoming new members. So again. Feel free to reach out to us for either becoming full members or associate members, depending on your level of commitment, and the brochure further detail this. And this idea is released to with this central hub, this club, to throughout the year and throughout the years to come, to help educate, share views, have insightful reports, publication, newsletters, webinars, conferences to enhance the knowledge, to share knowledge about what's going on, and really help build a real community and a real sector to meet the challenges and mobilize more capital, and that is really needed to face the global goals that nature is encountering. So we are more than welcome to answer any question on the Alliance itself. And Martin, a question to you also, if you want to say more elements on the Alliance, feel free. You have been really very active in all this preparation, so feel free to add anything I would have missed.
Perfect. No, thank you very much, Gucci. I think as you said, the message is we're open for membership. We're open to do much more this year. This is just kind of one of the first events that we are organizing ourselves. But actually, I'd also like to go back to the questions that we're receiving. They're actually coming in. So thank you very much, everyone, to ask so many questions. And we obviously now we're kind of singing all from the same hymn book here and saying how wonderful natural capital is an investment opportunity. But there's a very good question here from the audience, which is there's an inherent uncertainty in the delivery of nature-based solutions. How do you manage this risk for investors? And I think this is a super important question. So maybe I can place it on the panel. I don't know who would like to go first. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can start briefly. No, indeed, it's still a new investment territory, limited track record. We need to be careful that it's not becoming wishful thinking, but so we need to have very strong tools and ways of analyzing the investment opportunities, but also the risk. And I think in this teams, the objective is not to reinvent the wheel and really apply existing techniques for risk assessment that maybe can be slightly adapted to specific activities. For instance, what we are doing at Mirova is really translating all the project finance tools into the agriculture and forestry sector, which have had maybe so far more real estate approach than real project finance approaches. And so there needs to be strong discipline to build a good track record. And to help this, blended finance is also a solution where public and private money can be mixed to de-risk a bit private capital with public money that can play a catalytic role, that can encourage private investors to start investment right now instead of waiting for another 5 years to have a full track record for different strategies. And this is where also public entities, governments, but also philanthropy play a key role in unlocking further investments and investment decisions.
And it should be said that you actually have a few vehicles where you're incorporating this type of catalytic finance in order to get private investors involved, which is probably one way to manage the risk. Alina, may I kind of ask you, how do you manage the risk? Is this anything different than your other strategies? I mean, are you, let's put like that, are your risk managers, are they losing sleep over your natural capital strategy vis-a-vis other strategies?
Of course, we do face different risks, and the risks within our investment approach are very different to the ones that Gauthier has been discussing. And there are financial risks that we need to assess when we make investments. We're not just investing in solutions that create positive benefits for natural capital, but we're also investing in stocks and companies. So the financial analysis and the analysis of the financial risks and also the risk reward balance within the portfolio is very important for us. And equally on the other side, what I also need to mention is that the risk from the environmental, social, and governance perspective is also very important for us. So when we assess our investments and when we build together the high conviction portfolio of the companies in public equity space, the first step is, of course, identifying companies that develop the solutions and that have the right business strategy in terms of the products and the services that they provide. The second step is and also identifying whether this business is actually viable from the economic and financial perspective and managing that risk exposure. And then the third component to it is assessing the ESG from the practices perspective, making sure that the companies are not only delivering good with their outputs, but that they're also not creating any harm on the other side during their manufacturing process or anywhere within their footprint or the supply chain. And also manage their businesses well from the governance perspective. So there are really different layers of risks and all of them are integrated in the investment process.
Okay, thank you. So we talked about this as a nascent market, so barriers of entries are a bit more difficult. So one question from the audience here is now, how would the panel suggest emerging managers in securing sponsors to accelerate investable assets which address natural capital challenges? I don't know, Owen, if this is something I can ask you to have a crack at, or?
Yeah, well, listen, if there are emerging managers out there seeking sponsors, I'm sure that getting in touch with the panelists would be a great start. You know, there's lots of capital that is looking for homes. So for emerging managers that have got ideas and are willing to consider joint or integrated approaches, then I can imagine fruitful conversations with all four of us.
Good, perfect. Then there are many questions about not only carbon credits, but also about markets for biodiversity. And that's obviously, I think that's something we should touch on a little bit, and because it is obviously interesting. We need to build more revenue streams for natural capital in order to move to the next stage of this market. So maybe I'll lump a few. So one is, should there be a market but also how, if they are these type of markets, how do you ensure two things? On the one hand side, that you not just claim something that is actually already required by regulatory requirements, or the other question we got is, isn't there an issue the moment we put price on nature, we cause other problems such as food security, and so how would you maybe we can lump these three questions and actually have everybody take that, because I think that's really in the way the crux of the market. So do we need them? How could they look like, those incentives for biodiversity? And are they always positive, or are there also problems with that? I think it's a really, that would be a really interesting kind of perspective from each of you. I don't know who would like to start.
I'll happily kick that one off if you like,
Martin.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Because I think I'll probably exhaust my knowledge long before Alina and Gauthier. So I think definitely there is a market for biodiversity credits, and without giving too much away, I know that we're doing some interesting work with the Environment Agency and some insurance companies in terms of working out exactly what they might look like. But I think some of the questions highlight some of the difficulties associated with those, which are around some of the unintended consequences of putting biodiversity credits in place around ultimate land usage and what you forgo. So huge issue, and that's probably as much as I can say at the moment.
Thank you. Gauthier, I think you also had your hands up.
I mean, also maybe already answering or addressing the issue of competing objective between climate, biodiversity, social aspects, food security. It's clear that a holistic approach is needed, and we need to take into account all the dimensions. And there was an interesting report published jointly by the IPBES on biodiversity and the IPCC on climate, showing that at some point there can be some conflicts between climate and biodiversity objective, and it's also true with social and food security aspects. So it's why there needs to be robust standards and multi-dimensional analysis of the environment and social aspects, risk and positive impacts from the beginning. And so maybe also working together in the alliance is a way to define and have shared practices in terms of these types of standards. It's a way where we can have interesting discussions. And second, on the biodiversity credits or any ways of ensuring payment for ecosystem services, it is of course needed, and it's a good idea to value things that are good and to stop subsidies or for activities that are doing bad. But also I think it's important not to reinvent the wheel again. And there are existing markets. I mean, carbon credits, some standards are now integrating more and more biodiversity components. So instead of creating a separate scheme, maybe improve the existing ones, and the same goes with certified commodities or within the certifications for FSC, Rainforest Alliance. There are also interesting biodiversity aspects that can be leveraged instead of reinventing something new. So here again, an interesting topic for debate. Time is of the essence. So instead of reinventing everything, improving existing schemes can also be a good idea. Perfect.
Thank you, Alina. I don't know if you have any views on the biodiversity offsets.
No, I think a lot has been said, and there's barely anything to add. One thing that comes to mind is that actually the technological development and technological evolution creates a lot of potential alternative solutions that can alleviate some of that pressure of competition for resources. I think it was Ian who mentioned the vertical farming before. This can be a solution that can resolve the competition for the land. And thankfully enough, the technology is well advanced so that it can actually deliver products such as vegetables or fruits at a very competitive price. So when it comes to also the social impact that has been minimized by improving the efficiencies of these technologies. So I think that the key there is to really focus on delivering the objectives, make those objectives very clear in the asset allocation or the investment processes of specific strategies, and support the companies in developing, continue investing, and also creating some transparency in the market.
Thank you very much, Alina. We received quite a few more questions, but many of them would really discuss a detailed discussion. So I think what I suggest, in the interest of time, we leave it here. There are some questions in regard to the report. Owen, maybe you could provide us with the link. That would be really helpful, and then perhaps GFI can share this with the audience, because I think it's a really nice piece. So then I think I'm just left to thank my panel. Thank you very much. I think this was a really interesting discussion. Owen, I mean, we obviously hope that you will join our alliance very soon. I think you just it was a little interview actually between us. So I think we can all say you passed. So thank you very much. I found it really interesting. The questions just demonstrate that there is a lot to talk about this. That there is quite a significant interest in natural capital. That leads me just to mention that tomorrow we have another 1 hour lunch session here. Day 3 will focus on growth, which is using public capital to catalyze private sector finance. There was actually a specific question now here in the chat that we couldn't get into. So it was we touched a little bit with Gautier's fund, but I think to that person who asked that question, tomorrow you have a whole hour where this is being discussed and where some examples and ideas are being shared. It's a really good lineup tomorrow as well. So please don't miss it and join tomorrow. And that leads me just to thank everybody and wishing you a nice day. Goodbye.